Welcome everybody to Forza Horizon 4, and today we're taking a look at the 1981 Ford Fiesta XR2. Now this is part of the first generation that was produced from 1976 to 1983, with this version available from 1981 to 1983, and it's differentiated from the base models with additional black trim, larger circular headlights instead of the standard small square ones, a rear spoiler and XR2 decals, but the main difference is under the bonnet, as it has the largest engine that you could get on this version of the Fiesta, with a 1.6 litre inline-4 engine producing 84 horsepower and 91 pounds-feet of torque. Now I know that doesn't sound a lot, and it really isn't in comparison to other vehicles that are similar to this. Golf GTI for instance had way more than 100 horsepower, as well as plenty of more torque as well. So yeah, it is a little bit down on that iconic car, but it's a bit unfair to compare this to that iconic car because, you know, the Golf GTI was around a lot longer than this. It still is a lot around, and yeah, it's a car that has lived on far longer than the XR2 name ever will or ever has done. So yeah, it's a bit unfair to compare it to that, especially since this does have plenty of things going for it as well. It's just as practical as the Golf GTI, for instance, as you can see. Plenty of boot space, no high sill either, so yeah, you don't have to lift over heavy bags into the boot, and yeah, it's got plenty of room in the interior. I actually think this has a slightly more leg room than the Golf GTI, and yeah, even though it's got less power and less torque, it is actually lighter than the Golf by about 50 pounds, as it weighs 1,852 pounds, and unlike the Golf GTI, which was rather restrained in its looks in comparison to the standard Golf, it's a little bit more outlandish in terms of how it looks. It's got those extra rally lights on the front there, you've got the XR2 decals, and you've obviously got the spoiler as well. So yeah, it's nowhere near as restrained, but that's because this was going after a different kind of driver. The Golf was more like, middle class management kind of types, whereas this was far more of a working class vehicle, and that comes into the fact that this was actually far cheaper to buy than the Golf GTI as well. So yeah, I'm not going to compare it too much to the Golf GTI because while both are front wheel drive hot hatchbacks, this is going for a far different kind of market. So yeah, going to look at it in its own right, and to do so we're going to have to take it out there and see what it can do. So let's get out into the open road. Now, with it lacking as much power as it does, it's obviously no thrill-a-minute kind of car, but it does have plenty in the way of usable power, which is really what hot hatchbacks should be about. The same is obviously with the Golf GTI, but the same is also with this, and yeah, even more so really, because it's got a smaller engine, it's lighter, so in terms of running the vehicle on a day-to-day basis it would actually be cheaper. But at the end of the day, it's still got plenty of usable performance, and it's got a nice raucous sounding engine as well. And yeah, 0 to 60 in 9.4 seconds is not half bad. 0 to 100 is a little bit shabby at 39 seconds, but it can at least do 107 miles an hour, which isn't too much to ask for to get above 100 miles an hour with a car like this. But it still handles just as great as the Golf GTI, maybe even slightly more so, because it does have less in the way of weight. And especially up front in terms of weight as well, because it does have that smaller engine, and it stops dust as well, though the Golf GTI's biggest weakness were the brakes, so this stopping dust as well isn't really a compliment, it's just that it's no worse, but at the same time it's no better either. And yeah, it's just a nice fun car to drive really. It's lightweight, it's easy to truck around, and even though it's not got the most power in the world, it feels like it's got more power than it actually does, because it weighs so little and it's such a small car to start with. So yeah, I'm just glad really that we've got hot hatchbacks from the early 80s to compare against, because usually when it comes to the Golf GTI, we've only ever had the American version, which was dubbed the Rabbit, which was uglier and had far less power. So yeah, to have the normal European Golf on this game alongside this, yeah, is a really good treat, because yeah, you've finally got two hot hatchbacks that were sort of rivals from the time, though this was again aiming for a different market with a far cheaper price tag. But yeah, nonetheless, still a cracking vehicle in its own right, and it's a shame the XR2 name really didn't live on beyond, I think, the 90s, maybe even earlier than that. But yeah, it's a bit of a shame, because it was a really rather an iconic car name for a a certain type of people, and yeah, was certainly a working class hero of the time. But because it hasn't lived on so long like the GTI, it is a cult icon, quite frankly. And yeah, I do really rather like it. Wish we had more sporty Fiestas from before the 2000s on this game, because they did do plenty of them. But recently it's only been the modern ones that we've been able to try out, which is a bit of a shame. But hopefully with the next Forza Motorsport game we'll have a more expanded hot hatchback range, especially from the 70s and the 80s. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.